it was generally just a group of blokes mucking about together, I think. Not to everyone's taste, but then again, each to their own, as they say. It's not the sort of thing that you'd broadcast to your ordinary friends or acquaintances. You know, if you say, oh, I belong to the golf club or the cricket club, they can relate with that. But when you say, oh, I belong to a sort of SM group, which likes things like, you know, beatings, bondage, torture, cock and ball torture, fisting. It was private. It was your private life. That's what private meant. But we never thought we'd do anything illegal. I'll take you through a sort of typical thing. Yeah, it was a sex party, strictly illegal under the not more than 2 gay people having sex in a building type rules of the day. But it was essentially private. So straight away we got down to having a cup of tea and a natter about nothing in particular. They then knew of some outdoor place which was a sort of deserted tower. So we went off to this tower, and then one of the chaps, he was wearing a kilt. Quite a nice kilt, I don't know what the tartan was. And he peered over the edge of the top of this ruin, and then lifted his kilt up, and a couple of us started whacking him with belts and canes and things. One of the phrases was, pain is pleasure, and if done in the right way, pain can be quite enjoyable. Nobody was like kidnapped, tied up and tortured, or even required any medical treatment. It was all actually really rather friendly, pretty laid back. And we did film it with the sound and all the rest, and later on I edited it together. They were just made for the people within them to watch. And being pre-computer days, of course, they didn't flood all over the world to the internet. Though I say it myself, my ones were pretty good movies, I thought. Nice backlighting, always liked backlighting. At the time, the general attitude to gay folk was not good. It was pretty much at the height of the AIDS panic that flooded the country. The government was very anti. And so the climate for anything gay wasn't great at the time. Anderson, who was chief constable in Manchester area, was very anti-gay. And unfortunately, it's in Manchester that one of our tapes came to be seen by the police. And a couple of weeks later, just gone 7 a.m, there was a loud banging at the door, and there were these 7 policemen there from the obscene publication squad, led by Chief Inspector Hames, I think it was. So they hurtled in the house and questioned me for about 2 hours while searching through stuff. They brought a toy billiard cue down from the bedroom and they said, "Do you use this to beat people with?" And I said, "No, I use it to turn the television on and off as a remote control." And they said, "Have you got any comments?" And I said, "Yes, I don't see how I can be guilty of anything when everything was done with consent." And that was it. And then about, it must have been less than a week after the being charged, I got called in at work, and the couple of levels higher up than me said, "Have you seen today's papers?" I said, "No, don't get them." Anyway, he said, so you better go home like now. So that was it. I'd worked there for years and was in a good position. Not a single word of thanks for the effort put in over the years or anything. The trial, it was all unreal, like you're in a dream almost. You drag yourself up to the Crown Court every day, and we had the somewhat aptly named Judge Rant. By the time we got to the trial, I think there was 15 of us. I shouldn't think I'd met more than about 3 of them. 3 or 4 at the most. Unlike the way it was reported, which was that, this was a network of evil blokes. It wasn't really a network, it was more a sort of chain. Someone knew someone else. I can remember the prosecution made a real big point of how the people on the receiving end of all this, the submissive types, were poor, hard done by, abused persons, and how the people doing it were nasty bastards who are really the cause of the trouble. That sort of attitude took no account to the fact that we switched roles. So presumably we went from innocent to guilty and back on a fairly regular basis. We were advised to plead guilty. Mainly on the grounds that if we pled not guilty and were then found guilty, the sentences would be greater. But that was twisted around by the media. The tabloids revelled in it. Absolutely loved it. Anyway, it was all too much for me. I was actually under some psychiatrists. I'm not quite sure why. I think it was the feeling of persecution by the system. That was really what had got to me. It was the feeling that, quote, society didn't like me. Everyone likes to be liked. We were taking one of these police vans with the blackened windows that you see. It's all sort of fiberglass moulded interior, half slippy on the corners. And you could see the sort of pressman's camera flashes through the darkened glass. I remember my mate saying, "Oh, they're jolly good handcuffs. I don't suppose I could have a set for later because they're better than the ones I've got." We all ended up at Wandsworth, which is an awful bloody place. The whole atmosphere was just a menace. You felt you could be, done any time. I know for one of my friends, he said he never really felt at ease again, which is what they wanted from the beginning. The police had no doubt hoped that bringing this case would act as an example to all us perverts that this sort of thing must be and will be stamped out. Our case actually had the opposite effect. There was loads of marches of protest all over the place, far more publicity than if they'd done nothing. And that kept public awareness high. The upshot of this was that my mate and I got loads and loads of mail. Every day we would get probably 80% of the Wing's mail. We'd get postcards, letters. It was very good, to be honest, to have our wall plastered with all these cards and things. It really did make you feel less alone. In today's world, 30 odd years later almost, I wouldn't say it's accepted mainstream, but it's sort of understood. So things have moved on a little bit. But it's a very thin veneer, society's approval or disapproval of anything.